No, this matchup by ratings is pretty level. Grischuk and Nihal Sarin both over 3,000 in blitz chess with the 1 second increment that tends to favor the stronger player in classical chess, and that is Sasha Grischuk. At least for now, Nihal Sarin is an ascending player with an upwards trajectory, still a teenager. He's so promising, so strong in the moment, but Sasha Grischuk has that experience and has the higher rating of the two.
Indeed. And speaking of experience, I was looking some stuff up during the break. Grischuk got his Grandmaster title in the year 2000. Before Nihal Sarin was born, Grischuk was already a Grandmaster. So talking about experience, how's that for some experience? He's been on Chess Olympus for over 20 years.
Well, how much experience do you think that Grischuk has in this knight e7 variation of the Spanish? Because that move knight e7, usually that knight is on f6, but here it drops to e7.
Yeah, that's not the most common type of continuation, but actually recently, it's, I think, become more and more popular in the Ruy Lopez to play with the knight on e7, either immediately, if we rewind in this position, but here Nihal develops the bishop first. The question, of course, is what is he planning after the natural d4? I think he might have thrown in a check on b4, which is why Grischuk castles first.
Right, so he just limits Black's options a bit, forces the move f6, and that, look at the diagonal from a2 to g8, that's open, and that's why Black had to castle immediately, because if you waited even a turn, once a bishop landed on b3, you would not have been able to castle. So far, I like the way both players are playing an unorthodox, from a historical perspective, opening by Nihal Sarin, but as you said, in this day and age, it's very playable because this pawn triangle from c7 to e5 back over to g7, how are you going to crack that?
Yeah, that's going to be tough to crack. And I just want to point out that a check along this diagonal may be tempting, and Nihal eliminates that possibility by bringing the king to h8, but it's not particularly dangerous. And one of the virtues of the pawn in f6 is that it guards the g5 square. Otherwise, there would have been knight g5, queen h5 idea. That king on h8 is surprisingly safe here.
And it tucked itself away because queen b3 check could have won the b7 pawn. In some variations, the queen gets trapped, but in others, it just snags a free pawn. So that's why the king safely goes to h8. You see this often when a side castles queenside. They want to push their king further away from the center to avoid any possible check. That's why the king's in h8. So down, the tension remains in the center. d4 and e5 having a bit of a stare down. Neither side wants to capture.
Yeah, this is a very, this kind of a pressure cooker type of position. And Robert Grischuk has less time than his opponent. I've never heard of that. I thought that he never gets. I was promised that Grischuk never gets into time pressure.
Right, but in classical chess, he's usually 45 minutes to an hour behind.
Right,
here
I'm being sarcastic.
Here he's not even able to do that. So this is good time management for Grischuk. And when I look at this position, Danya, I wonder, does Black need to strike with b5? Because you can sit and wait, but I don't really see where your pieces are going. So the move b5 just to gain some space, maybe hop your knight away from c6 at some point. I don't see a clear-cut plan for Black in this position, even though it's extremely solid.
And queen e8 actually threatens knight takes d4. So in a sense, that is like b5. I think Grischuk might have to bring his bishop back to c2.
What if he plays king h1? It takes a lesson
that's a
out
nice move. Takes a page out of Nihal's book. Because the point is that knight takes f3 was check. Now it's not check and Black loses a piece. That is definitely a Grischuk move.
Well, you said Robert Grischuk before when you were trying to ask me a question. So, I'm just letting you know that maybe we're going to merge as a player at some point. That's bad news for him.
Changed your last name yet?
No. I'll work on it though. So bishop back to c2, just defending against that tactic that you pointed out. And the bishop, it looks just bad there. It's staring into a pawn. The pawn was already protected. And it's just avoiding the tactic, not moving the king from g1. Still, I asked you the same question. What is the idea for Black? I can see individual moves, sure, but what's the grander idea?
Well, I think f5, first of all, needs to be considered essentially on every move. I'm giving myself a pat on the back right there. Yeah. And in such positions, this is sort of the traditional plan. Now, the drawback of this is that Black has to be very careful to ensure that nothing can happen along the e-file. But I'm, at least visually, without really calculating anything, this looks pretty pleasant for Black, but maybe Grischuk will go d5 and knight e4, maybe the immediate knight e4. It could get a little shaky for Black.
You made mention of this before. The pawn f6 was also covering the g5 square. So if White can get A, D5, and B, knight G5, that knight may find its way to E6 eventually. So that's something that black has to be really, really careful about, because look at the light squares on the king side. Those are vulnerable from black's perspective. And with the queen going to B3, potentially knight on G5, as you're indicating, that's something to worry about. And look at the rook on E1, queen on E8. Rooks typically win stare downs with queens. So that queen on E8 might need to move itself very shortly.
And a nice move by Sasha. I really like knight E4 because D5 may seem tempting, but now the knight, small change of plans, drops back to G3. Black gets in huge trouble along the E file, as you had noted. D takes E5 on the next move. So yeah, Nihal has to be very, very careful here. He's got to find a precise move. He takes D4.
Bishop takes D4.
Uh-huh.
And now pawn takes C7 is a target, and there discovers the queen goes D7. So actually, if white can get queen B3, knight G5, like boom, all at once, the game is pretty much busted. But it takes some time. Like queen B3, maybe there's rook B5, defending against the B7 pawn and hitting the queen, gaining a tempo.
That's a very important detail, actually. Yeah, otherwise knight G5 would come with great effect. And obviously, don't sleep on Nihal's kingside play, because guess what? The moment he plays rook A to F8, he's going to be threatening various shenanigans of the rook takes F3 sort. So Sasha, I think, has to find some sort of active move that also takes care of his kingside. That bishop on A7 is also kind of a sleeping giant. And there comes knight EG5.
And I also see the eval bar take a bit of a dip here, not loving that move, although now it's going back towards the center. And knight E to G5, I wonder what's wrong with it. It seems very sensible to go into E6. I like what you said, though, about the potential of an exchange sacrifice on F3. That's something that white would has to avoid. That will just crush white on the king side. So at some point, that rook is coming to A8 to F8. I'm not sure if now is that moment, though.
Yeah, because now if you go rook F8, then black has to reckon with knight E6. And if you go through with the exchange stack, I mean, this doesn't have the same effect with this beast sitting on E6. Also, let alone the fact that white might have an intermediate move. So Nihal going bishop to B6. Interesting move, overprotecting the C pawn in order maybe to free up the queen and take the sting out of the move knight E6, which of course Sasha could play anyway.
Yes, but I do like that move. And also, you can throw in a bishop A5. Not that that's really threatening. It hits the rook, sure, the rook will move out the way. But there's a moment where that could be important. Queen D2, for example, not possible because of bishop A5. Or I guess it is, you have B4, but it just gets a little dicey.
That's right. And when I talk about Nihal's sort of mature playing style, I'm referring to moves like this. With a minute on the clock, it's just not easy to deal with this kind of prophylactic move. White has a lot of choices, a lot of possible moves, and Nihal he always, I think, knows the precise moment when to solidify his position. And now H6 should be considered. That knight on E6 could potentially get stranded there. I don't know.
And you can't play D5 for white because the rook now works its way to a pin. Yeah, or rook E8 or rook F6. Either of those moves look very promising because D5, you want to cement the knight in there. You can't do that with the rook on E3. Although the rook E3 move makes perfect sense if you want to triple on the E file.
That's right. And instead, Nihal going knight F4, to which Grischuk responds queen C2. Now, obviously, there's a little bit of just a little bit of danger on this diagonal. And after H6, is there something insane? I was thinking about intercepting the queen here with rook E6. Oh, knight E6.
There's so many interesting moves there. Even rook E7 was interesting instead of knight E6. Like, I don't know if it works out, but that's like a very adventurous move.
And is there G4? Or am I crazy? I guess, knight takes H3 check. Wow.
Yeah, we both spotted at the same time. It forces the knight back, and then knight on G5 is protecting the knight on F3. So once the G pawn moves, you don't have enough defenders on that knight.
But Grischuk is now tightening the noose. He doubles rooks. All of his pieces are, I wouldn't say perfectly coordinated, but every piece is doing something. Rook E7 is threatened. How does Nihal defend against that? Knight D5, maybe?
Knight takes H7 might be a threat as well, because once the king recaptures, it walks into a pin.
Yeah, potential G4. This is a lot to keep track of as Nihal now dips below a minute himself. Let's see what decision he comes up with. The eval bar, not too concerned, but I would be very concerned if I were playing black here. I
think H6 needs to be played. I understand rook E7's coming with a tempo against the queen, but I don't see a checkmating follow-up.
Wait, Robert, what if rook E7? Where do you go with the queen?
Oh, I see what you're doing. You try to sack your queen on F5.
I absolutely am, and H6 has been played.
Oh my gosh.
I think Sasha goes rook E7.
So queen B5 found.
Ooh.
So rook
now
F5
the queen heading to D5.
and the queen protects the rook on F5. That's really an important detail here. So the rook doesn't have to leave the back rank. Otherwise, there'd be a checkmate for white.
God, there's so many interesting tactics here, Robert. If you go A4, yeah, the queen centralizes on D5. Queen B5 is a lovely move because black also, of course, keeps contact with the E8 square. Sasha going knight E6.
And he's turning this from a tactical advantage into a positional one because white still controls the light squares. The bishop on B6 not in the game, and those exchange sacrifices we were talking about in F3, I don't think are that powerful, especially with the C7 and G7 pawns being under attack.
Right. I mean, this is refuted immediately with rook takes H6. Very nice move with checkmate to follow. Black is kind of stuck in molasses. King to G8. Now rook G6 looks very dangerous for black.
Oh, so many things look pretty.
Knight H4.
Knight H4 is what I was thinking about.
Sack on G7.
Yeah, but knight H4, there might be rook F5 back to F6, and you're barely holding on here.
Yeah, maybe knight G6 there. Let's see what Sasha does. And
What's
both
the time?
players down to 20 seconds. Our very first game.
Yeah.
We're in for an epic one.
He's got to go. He hasn't moved. 10 seconds.
8. I think knight H4 is the path forward. You got to get rid of that rook. No, he centralizes the queen instead.
And nice response there by Nihal.
Threatening checkmate.
Rook F7 has to be played, right?
Yeah, and then H6 might fall, but that's not the end of the world for black. I think Nihal has to be happy that his king is doing all right. He takes the pawn on E2. What a gutsy move.
Oh, but the rook E8 is going to be a problem.
Uh-oh, and knight G5 is now a huge threat. I think there are too many threats.
And the bishop is just helpless. He can't join the defensive effort.
Oh, and queen E6 is going to win, severing the connection between the king and the rook. It's checkmate after king H7, and Sasha strikes first.
You know, Dunn, bishop B6 was almost the move of the game. Like if he was able to hold that together, because really such a mature move, as you said. And after that, Sasha just, he went for it. He decided to bring all his pieces towards the king side and got the attack going. But that was really nice defense for a long time there by Nihal.
Absolutely. I wouldn't be too concerned if I were him. That could have gone either way. Now, maybe at the risk of Monday morning quarterbacking, maybe F5 was premature. I feel like, once Grischuk got that knight to G5, there were a few too many weaknesses on black's king side. But great first game by both sides, but especially, of course, by Sasha.
And quite masterful technique by Sasha there, because he was making inroads and all the light squares. Move after move was difficult for black to deal with that. And now as we get into game 2, it's a more locked up position. Nihal with the white pieces. He decides to take on C6 in the Spanish. And now he's trying to play for certain advantages here. The double pawns are not ideal for black, but normally it's not too big of an issue. And if you look from black's perspective, you're saying, well, I got the bishop pair. My bishop on G4 pins your knight. I have E5 defended. I can even castle queenside.
Yeah, that's
those
been
4
common.
pawns, making sure my king is ultra safe. And in these positions, Danya, I know from experience, black can actually attack white's king over if the kings are on opposite sides of the board.
Yeah, you also get this kind of structure in the exchange, Rai Lopez, which is not surprising because he took on C6 one move later than the exchange. Now, it used to be totally commonplace to castle short, but people like Kramnik, Aronian, they started castling long in these types of positions. And I think the positional logic here is that black has this pawn mass on the queen side. And these doubled pawns are actually good. It's like a pit stop, right? White's going to have a very hard time pushing his pawns fast, while black sometimes is a relatively easy time of launching a pawn storm. I like what Nihal's doing here, though.
Right. And in a position where all 8 pawns are on the board for each side, that means there are no open lines for the rook in an undoubled pawn structure. But with double pawns, look at the rook on D8. That's the best rook on the board once the knight moves out of the way. So I like what you're pointing to, though. Rook B1, maybe rook F to B1, and then B4, A4, and just throw your pawns up the board. It feels like it's a wishful attack rather than one that will gain much momentum.
Yeah, and maybe Nihal is playing more in the center. Maybe he wants to go C3 and ultimately launch D4. I'm a bit surprised that Sasha took on F3 here. I was, in my eyes, this pin is one of the most important ingredients of black's king side play, but obviously he understands these positions a lot better than I do. And I do think that white probably is slightly better here.
Yeah, in the long run, having the uncompromised pawn structure is a good thing. As I was mentioning just right now, because it's such a closed position, the semi-open file could be useful for black, but white's knight on E3 is great. It can hop into F5 at any moment. And as soon as you push pawns, like if black plays G6 and F6, is a bit of a target. So you don't really want to push any of your pawns. You'd like to keep your pawn structure intact.
Indeed, Nihal going for g3, but one of the typical ideas for black that I've seen in such positions is the knight maneuver to e6. g3 is a very double-edged sword, though, Robert, because it does create all of these hooks on the queen side, and something like g5 is not out of the question. Positionally, looks terrible to weaken f5, but white's king could get caught in the crossfire here. No, Grischuk reverting back to the plan I mentioned, and now maybe doubling rooks, but then h5 is going to be weak. So very double-edged pawn structure here.
And g5, as you mentioned, you're trying to make use of the hook, then f6 is loose. So it's not actually easy for black to punch through on the king side over here without dropping one pawn. And look at what white's doing. Rook d2, rook d1. At some point, d4 is going to be on the docket, and maybe black's going to play c5 just in time to stop it.
Yeah, and the aforementioned doubled pawns, once again, they're actually a strength for black rather than a weakness. After c5, you might say, oh, why give up such a monster outpost? Well, there's no outpost to speak of. The other pawn comes out to c6 and chases the knight away. So Grischuk hesitating a little bit, though. Maybe there's something he doesn't like about c5. Maybe he doesn't like the plan of a3, b4.
I'm guessing he's wondering if he can just play g5, that retreating move, queen f8. It takes the sting out of d3 to d4 because the queen won't be under attack, and it protected f6 so he could play g5. And those kind of retreating moves are moves that I almost never see when I'm playing my own games, but I appreciate so much when I'm watching a top level game like this.
Yeah, it's incredibly deep. And I think these top players, they almost never, they don't not make a move because it looks ugly or because it's a retreating move. To people like Grischuk, the specific idea behind a move totally supersedes the appearance of the move. Of course, they have their intuition. They trust their intuition. But this is what makes chess at this level so fun to watch. It's the depth of the ideas. And some of my favorite moves in chess are moves that appear to be ugly but contain a very deep and nuanced and dangerous idea. As Nihal starts the queenside pressure, and I think it's probably time to go g5.
Yes, although I think b4 is played to stop that knight from getting to c5, so white can push d5, and that knight has to go backwards rather than forward. So the knight, he says, I'm going to go knight f8. I understand you want to play d5, and here it is. But look at that knight on f8, the quality of the pieces. Whites are much better than blacks, and the undoubling the pawns is not a disaster for white. You're actually happy to gain more space for your remaining pieces.
That's right. And Nihal sort of the first to punch through in the center. This is a big decision, though, because I could see a case being made for either recapture. This is the more visually appealing move. And obviously C6, I think, is unthinkable here due to a check like this. And there's going to be hell to pay after knight takes f6.
Yeah, the tactics will start flying, and you don't need to invite Nihal Sarin to a puzzle rush session. He knows his tactics. He doesn't need any help. So right now, this is a really difficult position for Sasha Grischuk on the board, but also on the clock. He has less than half the time of his opponent, and that knight on d5 is a powerhouse. The c file is open. You play b5, and you have double rooks on d file. That looks good. Double rooks on the c file can be even more dangerous for black to deal with.
Yeah, that's a lovely idea when your rooks are doubled, and in just 2 moves, you reposition them to a different file. And the fact that black can almost never play c6, yeah, that's really, really hurting Sasha here, as he drops the rook to c8, trying to overprotect this c-pawn. Yeah, if I'm Nihal, maybe b5. There's really no rush here. I think he's kind of established all of his pieces reliably. Maybe even a pawn storm on the queen side is not out of the question here.
Oh, if you can just push that pawn up to a6 and then create some weaknesses in the light squares, that could lead to checkmate. And one more thing to point out that you mentioned earlier, that h5 pawn, that's a real weakness. So at knight f4 at some point may just win the pawn on h5.
Absolutely.
Not right now, because knight e5, and there's tactics in the f3 square.
Oh yeah, knight f4, knight e5, and if you myopically grab the pawn, then the knight's swinging to f3 with a fork.
Exactly.
Big moment here for Nihal. Maybe you just keep attacking a5. Black's going to put the knight on e5, but how scary is that? Maybe white can just shift the queen. But at that point, you're going to have to start being watchful of the move c6. If it comes at the right moment with a knight on e5, it might toss white's pieces back a little bit more than Nihal would like.
Yes, the drawback of being all in on the attack is that when your opponent parries the threat and kicks your pieces back, all of a sudden their pieces can start flying in. So c6, knight e5, and all that could be dangerous for white to do, especially because the f3 square, that's a vulnerable spot. And king g2, that makes sure that there's no fork on the f3 square and it's guarded a second time.
I like that move a lot, particularly with time trouble impending. You just don't want to grant your opponent a constant source of tricks and tactical operations. But knight g6, that's a really annoying move.
If rook e5 is the queen c8, that's what I'm wondering.
Queen c8 takes.
No, it's not. Knight b6, c takes b6.
cb, rook c1, and rook c5. Yeah, it just interjecting with the rook.
Oh, it's close, but it just barely doesn't work out.
Now, knight f4 possibly allows g6, and the queen is almost trapped.
That would not be good. Although the queen does have the h3 square, not where it wants to go. And what else can? So g6 doesn't work because the f6 pawn is loose. So I like b5. That looks like
just improve your position, keep the plan going, keep the legs churning on the queen side.
And there he goes.
There it is.
Knight c4. So knight d6. That's why the rook went to d4 to make sure that e4 wasn't lost.
Yeah, but then after queen f3, white's going to be threatening, I think, knight takes c7.
Right.
It's like pulling the legs out from under him.
Exactly. So that's why, and the rook on d4 is very useful there. It attacks the knight now, so it has to jump back and make sure that all the pawns are safe and sound. Now, this is really nice play by Nihal right now.
Yeah, he's just not granting any kind of counterplay. And I think Grischuk just put a little bit too much stock in this knight d6 idea. He's deciding where to go with his knight, but he's down to 10 seconds. Even for someone of Grischuk's caliber and time pressure ability, this is going to be almost impossible to survive. And as he tries to trade queens,
knight f4, I was thinking about consider right now, like knight f4 or knight e7 also.
Knight e7, but then queen takes f5. That's what I was thinking about.
And you can take back on f5 with the knight and have an advantage there, but knight f4 might win the h5 pawn in some of these lines.
Right, because that pawn repositioning to that's not what Grischuk's going to do, but this pawn repositioning to f5 means that the g pawn is totally immobile. This is a winning endgame.
And the thing I like most, no matter what move he ends up playing, the fact that he's sitting and thinking, instead of playing in Sasha's time trouble, Nihal's saying, I know I have a good position. I can win over the board. Let me not rush this and allow a very talented speed player like Sasha Grischuk to get back in the game because I'm putting too much stock into the time pressure.
That's right. And this is what I'm talking about. He's so patient. I mean, how many people would just start blitzing out moves? Grischuk's got 10 seconds. He can't survive. But that's how Grischuk has won so many games. And instead, Nihal taking 30, 45 seconds, recognizing the critical moments. And there's knight f4. Looks like he's going to win a pawn.
Oh, G6.
But it's not so simple. G6 and G5.
Mm-hmm. And there's exactly what Sasha needs, is that counterplay.
B6 maybe?
Well, B6 is really dangerous for black to deal with.
Yeah, but the attack might run out of fuel if black simply takes twice on B6. Now Nihal is down to 20 seconds.
Maybe A6, just try to create some soft light squares over there.
Agree completely. And if black plays B6, there's going to be constant tactical ideas connected with queen takes 8, but he takes the pawn, and there comes Grischuk with G5. He's got some counterplay. Can he convert it into anything tangible? Okay, but knight takes C5, queen G4. That was a bluff.
And this queen takes C8 mating ideas at the end. I think that might happen. Okay, rook D8 first.
E8,
nice.
Take C8 and queen takes G4.
You have 2 pawns.
This is now just a matter of he doesn't even take the pawn.
He's going queen D3. Rook F5. Oh, he's winning the G4 pawn this way?
I don't know. I mean, I guess he just wants to push the E pawn. Sasha
wants he wanted the B5 A6 pawn of the queen too.
Yeah, now this is completely winning. You can go E5, you can go queen F3 check, or
queen
just
E4.
Queen F3. Yeah, queen E4.
Same idea.
We're coming into G7.
Mate on B7. Wow, what a game.
What a game.
Are we just like becoming each other? We've commentated for 3 straight days.
Well, you're becoming Robert Grischuk, Nihal, and there it is. We're like melding into this one entity.